If they suddenly stop these stories about our plan to attack NATO now, well then. Hoping to scare voters and continue this line, but surprisingly, in the early stages, they talked. When the special military operation began, some Americans and Europeans said, but if we accept Ukraine into NATO, Putin will not have time to attack NATO members. What are they talking about now? Ukraine cannot lose because if it loses, Putin will immediately attack NATO. Yes, the logic is obvious, just to scare and scare. I don't know how to comment on all this. We need to name some Norwegian commander of the RVI armed forces, and we need to prepare for a military confrontation with Russia in the Arctic. Everywhere now, all of this is expected of us. No, I am. Putin has repeatedly told us that there is no point in attacking them if it's destined. If they themselves want to bring NATO's borders closer to ours, we will. Well, in Ukraine, of course, we won't allow that to happen. Soon I knew that there would be a lot of politicians in Western Ukraine who had made their judgments on this, but Ukraine was originally Russian. At least, and be part of the Russian world. He wants to speak Russian to his children, raise them, and bring flowers to the monument to those who shed blood for this land in the Russian Empire during the Soviet era and the Great Patriotic War. This is not discussed, in my opinion.
Sergei Viktorovich, you just said she wouldn't miss the opposition there. In fact, this is a chance to hit these people there. Are there any specific people involved in the destruction of Russia? I don't know, but not the hawks. Well, at least yes, if it's not pigeons, they're at least more or less rational, we can deal with them. Maybe we even have a chance, as they say, to break into the barrel, the sun, Macron, anyone else you think.
Well, no, it's hard to guess that everything is developing under the rug there. They don't elect the same people, they elect the European Commissioner when the Parliament is elected there. In a narrow circle, he also secretly agreed with the European Commission's candidacy for the presidency of the European Council. And here it is. Representative for Security, Foreign Policy and Security. In our country, we have never given up contact with all political forces, especially systemic political forces, such as Marine Le Pen's party, as an alternative to Germany, and some other less prominent movements. Farage must be here. An Englishman who is now actively involved in the promotion of conservative forces is exemplary. By the way, in Brussels, they recently held their perfectly legitimate, open and regular Congress. What about the head of a micro-district in Brussels? After 2 AM, after the start of this conservative conference where Farage was, many other open system official politicians shut down. The head of this community is here, he said to the police. No, you can't. I'm tired of this soul, the guards. I'm tired, yes, you're all these extremists, Nastia. The singing was bad. By the way, it is no coincidence that the West is duplicitous again, and that it is irreparable in its own greatness, that it has no impunity. This is his superior complex. Once the German alternative begins to gain, what is the additional interest? The question of public opinion. Immediately there was a wave Is this Russia? Did Russian private agents catch 2 Germans there who were spying, preparing terrorist attacks on 2 US military bases in Germany and other companies where weapons came from in Ukraine? By the way, I will point out in parentheses that the ambassador was summoned directly immediately, and these 2 are preparing for a terrorist attack.
Кстати, в скобках замечу, что тут же прям вызвали посла, вот двое, готовили теракты.
So these 2 needles became a haystack. It turns out that finding is completely no problem, and months of preparation for a terrorist attack on Nord Stream. Infrastructure projects that are extremely beneficial to Germany. The armed forces were involved in the preparation of the terrorist attack. The navies and air forces of many NATO countries are now in the public domain, and no one has noticed all these sketches. But as they said, the 2 citizens who were just preparing for the terrorist attack were immediately found. But the accusation is that all these opposition parties are now increasing their activities because of their Russian support.
Оппозиционные партии сейчас наращивают свою активность, потому что их Россия поддерживает всеми, в том числе нелегальными.
All of them, including illegal means. It's very indicative when we talk. In France, at least now, we just shut everything out to the French, the Americans, the British, and other members of the European Union and NATO. Their embassy is not just involved in some things here. Lech, who are rumored to be there as they meet in violation of NANI. 3. There is such a category of Russian employees on the spot. They are employed for certain types of administrative and technical work. When they are sent to various regions and take advantage of their social affiliation, they try to maintain antipathy. This is outrageous to the government movement of any foreign agent. You know, they can do anything. You can't even ask us to meet. With an alternative for Germany, that's great.
I remember the German alternative. In addition, there was a search yesterday. This is how their democratic freedoms work.
Parliamentary party.
Yes, we need to learn. I remind all of us that we have been working live for more than an hour on 3 radio stations, said the Moscow satellite of Komsomolskaya Pravda. There are still a lot of questions to be answered, and we have half an hour left, so I have to say that we have to go into this almost blitz mode. Sergeyevich invited us to celebrate the 80th anniversary of the Allied landings in Normandy. We're going to go to the first 2. Is this Macron? Is it a split personality, or is it what's going on?
We weren't called, and we didn't call them in this way. When they're going to do something, they can't you. Only decency remains, because decent people guide, send a letter, and then announce it. And then they said, we're going to invite, yes, but we're not going to invite anyone, Putin, but no one's going to invite anyone. We didn't get anything at all. If we do, we'll tell you. I can only say that 5 years ago, on the 75th anniversary of the D-Day landings, we were represented by an ambassador. 10 years ago, 14 years old. There was a meeting that began the Taman format for Ukraine, and it began the process and ended with the signing of an agreement. Germany, France, and Ukraine will not implement this, so this is our illusion.
So it might be a good thing not to invite.
But from a point of view, but from a historical truth, historical justice point of view, listen, there would be no 2 fronts without heroism and sacrifice. Tens of millions of Soviet citizens would not be. 2 example is more correct, parallel example you. The Germans spent, I don't remember what day, to remember the victims of the concentration camps. We proudly announced that we will not invite Russians to participate in this year's event.
Found something to be proud of. Let's go back to the Middle East. There was a crackdown on Iran tonight. What do you think? What's going on there right now? Could it lead to Iran being forced to consider nuclear weapons, even if it had not thought about it before?
These are the arguments I've heard. They're spreading in the Israeli media in the West. Wish. And the goal, in my opinion, see? Before turning the international community away from what is happening in the Gaza Strip, where there is a humanitarian catastrophe, many UN Human Rights Council special rapporteurs have already spoken of genocide. Turn your attention to Iran as a threat. We want to blame Yula and Iran, and they want to use nuclear weapons that they don't have. This has been confirmed by the International Atomic Energy Agency. Iran is the most verified state of the treaty on the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons. There is a law, and even a fatwa is a fatwa order judgment statement. The Supreme Leader's assumption is that you were previously banned, and Iran does not need to do this at all now. After Iran responded to the unacceptable attack on the Iranian consulate, which killed people, and Iran responded the day before yesterday. Russian and Iranian leaders had telephone contact. Our representatives and the Israelis, and we made it very clear in these conversations that Iran does not want to escalate. He couldn't help but respond to a serious violation, international law, and the status of diplomatic missions, but he does not want to escalate, and almost all experts think so about Iran's real answer. And it is clear that the same is true. I hope I'm not mistaken. The same is true of Israel's response. This is the object in Isfahan.
Sergeyevich is here. Iran's conflict with Israel is wider than this conflict in the Middle East. Arabs, Israelis. Everything behind this involves so much that only experts can understand hypothetically, if the hope is that it can be resolved at some point through the efforts of 3 countries, not ours, or everything has gone so far. So much blood and so much emotion. What is it? This is eternal jihad, eternal fatwa, forever gluing the possibility of nuclear war. A century ahead?
But almost all the troubles in the Middle East are the expansion of terrorism and extremism. They are absorbed first. How much is their unresolved flow? 75 years old. On the Palestinian issue, they promised to establish a verdict, promised to decide to establish 2 states 48 years ago. 1 state was established, and 2 states have not yet been established. And territory.
The United States will veto what Palestine has.
He has reported that the territories defined in 48 are already completely different. Many of these territories are owed to Palestinians, and they are classified as occupied territories because they are. Israel has not been cut off from the resolution that created 2 states. But of course, the situation is different. The 67-year war is no longer about the 48-year boundary, how they were ideally defined at the time as the 67-year boundary. These are the 7-year border decisions of the United Nations, the Palestinian capital, East Jerusalem, the return of refugees to Palestine, and the solution of water use issues on a fair basis, such basic things. If this were done in time, I think the Middle East would be much calmer, if not 100% unlikely, but the Palestinian leadership, another friend of Rafteh, also made mistakes.
Но там были ошибки и со стороны палестинского руководства, еще при Ясере Арафате, подписывались договоренности.
Both sides have signed an agreement, but there are problems, but the key is still to gather the will into a fist and implement the agreement. When the quartet of international mediators from Russia, the United States, the European Union, and the United Nations worked somewhere in 2003 was my year, but exactly 20 years ago, the Security Council adopted the quartet proposal, resolution that solidified the roadmap for a Palestinian state. During the year, everything there was arranged by month or week, and it was suitable for everyone. She took into account what had happened on earth at the time. Now, well, first. Yes, Gaza is Gaza, but Netanyahu announced the need to set up a buffer zone in Gaza. Actually, they want to... I don't know how the story will end with Rafah, the southernmost settlement, where 1.5 million refugees are living in incredible conditions. But they would certainly prefer these people to go to Egypt, and in Gaza, as he says, we will create a buffer zone and no one will touch us. But the West Bank, which the second part of the Palestinian state should be unified, including geographically. Logistically, it is full of illegal settlements that even the United States condemns. There are tens of thousands of settlers who come regularly. They clashed with the Arans in physical clashes and gun battles. But if we do not start to establish a Palestinian state, it will not be good. Americans have been trying. Under Trump, declare what is now, this is Palestine, although walking there is interspersed between them. Everyone is going to drive this. Well, it's impossible, but first of all, Netanyahu said now, you know, when everyone started saying that we should always keep in mind after this hot phase of the Palestinian state negotiations, he said, you know, I'm not going to do Palestinian state at all. I am concerned with the security of the state of Israel, hello, and when the ceasefire resolution was passed. The lady representing the United States on the Security Council said, well, yes, we abstained in general, then we didn't lead, but it's not mandatory. And if it's not mandatory, then everything about the Palestinian state is not mandatory. Americans will argue like this, but the situation is very bad. We want to end the violence. We want to solve humanitarian problems. But first and foremost, we want Arabs. With the support of all healthy forces, we took the initiative. Take control of the establishment of a Palestinian state.